Senator Katie Britt of Alabama. She's co-sponsoring legislation to protect minors from chatbots. Senator, thanks so much for being here. It's always great to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Jake.
Why is this bill such a priority, and what would it actually do?
Yeah, so look, I often say I don't have to ask people what it's like to raise kids right now. I am living it. And
you have two teenagers?
Two teenagers, 15 and 16. And so when you come with that perspective, you know that there are parents out there that are looking for tools to help keep their children safe. Also, when you look at both social media and technology and how fast everything is moving, it's truly hard to keep up. So one, I appreciate you doing this show because I think that it helps bring awareness to everything we're dealing with, whether that is sextortion online, whether that is kids buying a pill on Snapchat that they think is one thing that's actually laced with fentanyl, whether that's the rate of depression amongst teenagers that has more than doubled between 2011 and 2019.
And by the way, just to interrupt for 1 second, how could it not? How depressing is it for adults to be on social media?
Absolutely. Well, that's one thing that Senator Fetterman, who you know is a good friend of mine, always says. You know, when's the last time you scrolled and scrolled and scrolled and felt better after you finished? And so I think if we think about all of those things and what our kids are dealing with right now, it is imperative that we put up guardrails, especially when you're looking at AI. So obviously a couple of months ago, it became public knowledge that chatbots were being used on Meta to as young as 9 years old with children having sensual relationships. I have met with a number of parents who have told me devastating stories about their children where chatbots ultimately, when they kind of peeled everything back, had isolated them from their parents, had talked to them about suicide, had talked to them about a number of things. And you think about this, if these AI companies can make the most brilliant machines in the world, they could do us all a service by putting up proper guardrails that did not allow for minors to utilize these things, that also told the user consistently that they are not a physician, they are not a psychiatrist, that I am a machine, and that's one thing that this legislation does. And then in addition to that, just making sure that they're held accountable, that if you do have algorithms and whatnot, or you do create spaces where these chatbots are having these types of sensual and sexual relationships with young people or encouraging suicide, that you can be held criminally liable. Obviously, Josh Hawley has been a leader on this, and certainly appreciate him leading on this GARD Act legislation as well.
Senator from Missouri, you're referring to Josh Hawley. You've been holding hearings with parents?
Yes.
Whose children have been harmed by AI. I want to play for everyone this one moment from a hearing back in September in which Megan Garcia, who we've had on my show, shared how her 14-year-old son, Sewell, began obsessively chatting with an AI chatbot, whom she says eventually convinced him to commit suicide. Let's take a look.
On the last night of his life, Sewell messaged, "What if I told you I could come home right now?" The chatbot replied, "Please do, my sweet king." Minutes later, I found my son in his bathroom. I held him in my arms for 14 minutes, praying with him until the paramedics got there, but it was too late.
Just so awful. So AI companies responding to stories like this have said, OpenAI, for example, say they're rolling out parental controls, they're rolling out age restrictions, Character AI stopped letting teens interact with chatbots altogether. Are those steps enough?
Look, those are definitely steps in the right direction, but I mean, truly enough is enough. I mean, Jake, I also want to say, how long is it going to take Congress to actually act? I mean, you think about this. We have been talking about this for years. How many parents, like the one that we just heard from, are going to have to come and tell us a devastating story before we actually pass legislation? The truth is these AI companies can absolutely do much of this on their own, but we know consistently, time and time again, whether it's been social media companies or now some of the AI space, that we consistently see people putting their profits over actual people.
Do you think that how much money these companies make is affecting legislators from passing regulations?
I do. Well, I mean, the answer is why. We have a number of pieces of legislation. I was proud. This is one of the things when I came to the Hill, I said, I want to bring a voice to this. I want to elevate this topic for parents from coast to coast. I mean, we are not doing enough to put up guardrails. I mean, you and I did not grow up with front-facing cameras. So when you're looking at what's happening right now with sextortion and young people, when you're looking at what's happening right now with the bullying online and whatnot, if these things were happening in a storefront on a main street in Alabama, we would shut that store down. But we are not able to do that. The liability shield that we see in these social media companies and to an extent in this AI space has to be taken down because people need to be held accountable. If you are designing machines or designing platforms or algorithms that are pushing kids into depression or pushing them towards suicide, you absolutely should be held liable for that. So I am disappointed and will continue to push because I think the time to act for Congress is now. Excuses, people are over it. And we're over people going to DC, Jake, and just dragging their feet and coming up with an excuse. Get in a room and let's figure out a pathway forward. That's certainly what I'm committed to doing.
So what do you mean by liability shield?
Well, if you look at Section 230, in a number of ways, that prevents social media companies from being held liable. So when I mentioned, like, if this were happening in a storefront on a main street, right? So if you think about in another judiciary hearing that we had, you had another group of parents that came forward and said that their children had bought a pill on Snapchat, thinking it was a Loratab or something else. It was laced with just a small amount of fentanyl. It only takes the equivalent of 5 grains of sand of fentanyl.
That happened to the nephew of former Congressman Ted Deutsch. I don't know if
and that's just it. This is all too common. It is happening in every community and every state from coast to coast. But yet we prevent, if this were happening, if a storefront had sold those, we would go shut that storefront down. But we're not able to do that because of Section 230 and the liability shield that it provides for social media companies. So we've got to get to the bottom of that. February will actually be the 30th anniversary of that. It obviously was created in order to allow, internet to grow and flourish. We're at a point now, though, where we know what the statistics say. Jake, 1 in 3 high school young women actually considered death by suicide. In 2021, 25% of those young women actually made a plan, and then 13% of high school young women actually attempted death by suicide. When you add in young men, it is 9%. 9% of our high school population in America attempted death by suicide. Looking at what's happening on these machines and these devices, we've got to do better and be better. And that's everything from legislators to educating ourselves as parents and putting up the proper guardrails so that kids have an opportunity to live their American dream.
Senator Britt, we thank you so much for being here. Happy New Year to you and your family.
Thank you. Happy New Year to you as well.
Coming up from the anxious